Okay, so in this clip we're going to be looking at Cicero's participation in the civil war between Caesar and Pompey, and also his relationship with Caesar himself. Now, when Cicero comes back to Rome from his governorship of Cilicia, he describes a situation, a scene at Pompey's villa. He describes a madhouse of men who are thirsting for war, and what's happened while Cicero's been in Cilicia is that the tension between Caesar and Pompey has been building and building and building. Cicero, remember, has been completely aware of the situation because of his informant Caelius, who's constantly sort of keeping him up to date with the political situation. What Cicero's got to do, and what he really doesn't want to do, is to make a decision about which side he should choose. In a letter to Atticus, where he writes lots of rhetorical, philosophical questions, he refers to the right-minded party. So who's Cicero going to choose? In the end, obviously, he's going to go with Pompey and the Optimates. Why that? Because Pompey and Cicero, remember, have got a previous relationship. They've worked together in the past. Pompey and the Optimates arguably are closer toward Concordia Ordinum. Caesar, remember, has a status of enemy of the state at the time as well. He's had an SCU put against him. However, Cicero, even though he's going to eventually go onto Pompey's side, will attempt to mediate with Caesar and with Pompey between the two of them, try and stop this war. He'll also meet Caesar at Formiae in a meeting that won't go particularly well. Now, in order to have a little look at Cicero's attempts to mediate, there's three really awesome letters to have a little look at. And the first one is the Pompey to Cicero letter on the 20th of February. Now, this is where Pompey attempts to get Cicero on his side to side with him. And obviously, you'd want Cicero on your side. He's the Pater Patriae. He's viewed as a man of principle. He's almost like Rome's soul, so to speak, or Rome's conscience. If Cicero's on your side, you're clearly the goodies. Pompey writes a really flattering letter to Cicero, including phrases such as referring to his courage of old, talking about him dealing with Catiline, his exceptional and unceasing patriotism, and right at the end of the very, very short letter, he makes an offer to Cicero to plan together how to rescue our sorely afflicted country. In essence, the Pompey to Cicero letter is an attempt to flatter Cicero, so he goes over to Pompey's side. Cicero desperately tries to mediate with Caesar. It's just too late. In a very flattering letter to Caesar, Cicero talks about Caesar's outstanding statesmanship, and really interestingly, he talks about how the war wasn't Caesar's fault. It involved an infringement of your rights. And then finally, right at the end of the letter, he talks about why he's the best person to reconcile and bring together Pompey and Caesar, because he indeed is a friend of peace and of you both. So again, another flattering letter. Now, the reply that he gets back from Caesar is a little bit feisty, to say the least. There is a little bit of flattery in it. He does talk about Cicero being a great statesman, but there is an awful lot of veiled threat. So, for instance, Cicero gets this letter stating that Caesar says he would damage their good relations if he displayed resistance, if he got involved now. Caesar also says this one, which you could think could be a little bit of flattery, but actually it's probably a bit of threat as well, isn't it? What could be more appropriate for a man of peace than to keep out? Is he almost painting Cicero as a bit of a weakling, maybe? And then finally, at the end of that particular letter that he writes to Cicero, he says, abstention from the quarrel is the most honourable course. Basically, keep out Cicero. A high degree of threat. Cicero, once he receives that letter, kind of makes his mind up to go with Pompey. But interestingly, as soon as he makes that decision, he pretty much regrets that decision. He says in this letter to Atticus on the 24th of February, he says that Pompey is a disgrace. What a disgrace Pompey is. And he's not happy about a number of key things that Pompey has done. First of all, Pompey has become afraid of Caesar. Pompey has refused peace terms. Pompey evacuated Rome, which for Cicero is a cardinal sin. And then finally, also, Pompey has not communicated to Cicero about his plan to evacuate Rome and go to Greece. Now, Cicero will be delayed going to Pompey's camp because his daughter is in labour, plus he's trying to mediate between Caesar and Pompey, and he's got to wait for that sort of reply, that really threatening reply back from Caesar. So he's late to get into Pompey's camp. Now, we kind of want Cicero to have a civil war like this. In reality, Cicero's civil war is more like this. Now, there's no letters that we've got from Cicero in Pompey's camp. But we certainly do have a really sort of interesting extract from Plutarch from the life of Cicero, and in it he paints a picture of a Cicero that's a bit like a mood hoover, really bringing down morale. He's critical of Pompey and his decisions. He mocks Pompey's generals. He's disgusted by their bloodthirsty attitude. He's ill during the Battle of Pharsalus, which is really damning. And he's actually nearly killed by Pompey's sons. He's only rescued by Cato when he refuses command after Pompey has flown from Pharsalus. More damning in the eyes of the Republicans, or Cato and the Optimates, is Cicero's decision to immediately try and reconcile with Caesar. Now, in regard for the actual sort of civil war itself, remember Pompey from Pharsalus flees to Egypt. Caesar will try and chase him, but Pompey is assassinated by agents of Ptolemy, who's having a civil war with his sister and wife, lovely, Cleopatra. Caesar is actually sieged in Alexandria for a good while, and obviously if you're in a palace with Cleopatra for a long period of time, there's only a certain amount of leisure activities. After he breaks that sort of siege of Alexandria, Ptolemy ends up getting killed. Cleopatra is restored onto the throne, plus Caesar has a nice little love child with her. Caesar decides to mop up client king resistance in the east, so he goes to Zela, where he fights a very, very quick campaign, encapsulated by that famous quote, Veni, Vidi, Vici. Once he's dealt with these client kings, he then goes to North Africa, where a sizable force has been put together by Cato and the Optimates. So Caesar, going to North Africa, defeats Cato at the Battle of Thapsus, where Cato's elephants really sort of score some own goals. Cato commits suicide twice, which is quite impressive. And then finally, Caesar mops up any surviving Republicans when he goes to Spain and fights the final battle of the Civil Wars, which is the Battle of Munda. What's Cicero doing at all this time? Well, Cicero, after Pharsalus, goes back to Italy, where he spends 11 months in Brundisium. The reason why he's there for 11 months is because he's been forced to wait there by Mark Antony. Cicero is temporarily reconciled to Caesar. Caesar visits him. They go for a lovely little stroll on the beach. And Cicero is reconciled to Caesar. And he delivers speeches requesting Caesar to pardon his enemies. That's a good thing, but on the slightly negative note, Cicero writes a massive eulogy about Cato, which Caesar clearly didn't like, because he wrote a massive anti-Cato response. So that wasn't the best thing to do for their relationship. All in all, Cicero keeps out of politics after Pharsalus. He takes Atticus's advice to give up flattery and be at least half free. Now, Caesar, once the defeat of the Republicans has occurred, is pretty much unchallenged in Rome, and as dictator, he starts passing various laws which really offend people in the Senate, or when I say people, factions in the Senate, the remnants of the Optimates, people like Brutus, people like Cassius. For instance, he increases the Senate numbers by introducing Gauls, plebs into the Senate, apparently according to Suetonius, soldiers. He reforms the calendar, and obviously names a month after himself, good old July. The building program, a massive building program, partly funded by the Senate. The latifundia reforms, where he decrees that a third of slaves on these latifundia estates are to be freed. That would have really hurt landowners in the wallet. Increase of legionary pay, and also the establishment of veteran colonies. To be honest, these 6 are nothing compared to the big 2 that Caesar really does, that sort of really winds up people in the Senate. And that's his title as Dictator Perpetus and his policy of Clementia. Dictator Perpetus, dictator forever, dictator for life. The translations are a bit sort of, it's not sure sort of one way or the other, but essentially a dictator permanently. Remember, Romans had always had dictators. Sulla was the first one that changed it from 6 months to a year. Caesar goes really sort of whole hog here. In addition to that, Caesar's attitude of clementia or mercy was almost seen to be quite arrogant, forgiving his enemies when really his enemies didn't think they'd done anything particularly wrong. So Cicero does keep out of politics, and it seems to be at least on positive terms with Caesar. However, there's an absolutely lovely letter in about sort of a few months before Caesar's assassination, written to Atticus, and in it he really sort of shows his true feelings. He's received a letter from Brutus saying that Caesar has converted to the good party, so it's loyal to the Republic, loyal to the Senate. Cicero writes this back to Atticus. So Brutus reports that Caesar was converted to the good party. Splendid news, but where's he going to find them unless he hangs himself? And then he reserves a really nice little brash put down for Brutus when he reminds Brutus of his family tree, and that Brutus of all people should be the last person to be cozying up to a dictator because of what his great granddad did in establishing the Republic and being one of the first consuls. Now, Cicero's isolation is shattered when a certain guest rocks up for dinner. And Caesar, who's on a little mini tour, rocks up at Cicero's house for dinner. Now, the letter that Cicero writes to Atticus describing Caesar's visit to dinner is actually really, really positive. He describes Caesar as a formidable guest. He really, importantly as well, describes the whole sort of scene as quite pleasant. He says they're human beings together. And the reason why they're human beings together is that they don't really talk about politics. They talk about literature and literary matters. So really it sort of suggests on an informal, non-political basis, these guys, these two intellectuals, these two philosophers, these two orators, these two writers, actually kind of get on when you're not talking about politics. So let's have a look at the Cicero-Caesar relationship as a whole. It does have its ups and downs. There are some positive things. So remember, when the first triumvirate is formed, Caesar actually offers for Cicero to join the triumvirate, something that Cicero rejects because of his attitude of concordia ordinum, and he's obviously then subsequently exiled. So Claudius is used by Caesar in the first triumvirate to get rid of Cicero. That's clearly a negative for their relationship. When Cicero is recalled, which is a bit of a positive thing because Caesar has to agree to it, and Quintus Cicero, Cicero's brother, sort of gives assurances of Cicero's good behaviour. That could look good, but then Cicero starts doing sort of things like the procestio speech, which really angers Caesar. You've got the conferences at Ravenna and Lucca that Cicero is not invited to, and then he has to sing his palinode by defending allies rather. That Pompey joined the civil war is obviously not a great thing. But then we do have a positive when Cicero and Caesar are reconciled at Brundisium. But then Cicero very quickly messes that up with the whole eulogy with Cato. Cicero's retiring from politics and keeping out, giving up flattery and being at least half free. The dinner with Caesar, quite a positive thing. And then obviously Caesar's assassination, literally months after that dinner with Caesar, describing how they were human beings together.